On Press Perspective today, we revisit the U.S. Iran conflict and North Korea's latest missile launch that are all raising security concerns. Do stay with us. Hope your work week is off to a good start. It's Monday, August 10th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. As tensions between the U.S. and Iran continue, global attention remains fixed on whether diplomacy can prevent a wider regional conflict and keep the Strait of Hormuz open, even as North Korea heightens concerns here with its latest ballistic missile launch ahead of this month's South Korea-U.S. military exercise. For more on this, I have Fabian Kretschmer with German news agency DPA here in the studio. Fabian, welcome back.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Ban Kil-Joo at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy joining our session virtually. Professor Ban, as always, it's a pleasure.
Good to be with you.
Fabian, we start here in the studio. Let's begin with the latest in the U.S.-Iran conflict.
Yeah, actually, to describe the latest is not an easy task because there's a lot of dynamic in the story. A lot of things change from a day-to-day basis. But to sum it up, I would say there was some diplomatic movement, but in the central conflict questions, well, I think they're locked in. I don't see a breakthrough yet. So U.S. President Donald Trump, he said that the war could end, quote unquote, pretty soon. Why? He says Iran is not able to sustain the conflict much longer. He was citing the state of the Iranian economy. The inflation is pretty bad, etc. So they have their problems. But on the other hand, it's also widely acknowledged that the U.S. is running out of ammunition, of especially those long-distance missiles. So they also have an interest to suspend the attacks for now. Right now, both states are not negotiating directly, but they have Oman as their intermediary. And Iran basically fixed a list of demands, what is needed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, according to Iran. And that includes that the U.S. should compensate the Iran for wartime damages, and it should lift sanctions, economic sanctions. And this is something that the U.S. is for now not willing to do. So we basically have two sides locked in, but we also don't have a further escalation. U.S. President Trump recently said that he takes a low-key approach in this conflict. So, I mean, how will it go further? My opinion is that probably this back and forth will stay for a while.
Right. In the meantime, Professor Ban, prospects of transit tolls in the Strait of Hormuz are rising. What are the implications of such tolls in the Strait of Hormuz for the international community, including South Korea?
Well, since transit tolls means the complete control of the Strait of Hormuz by Iran, those measures pose serious challenges to the international community in many ways. First of all, the implementation of transit tolls could serve as a facilitator to make a rules-based maritime order falter seriously. Inherently, these should serve as public goods so that everyone can use them freely, which is feasible under the rules-based maritime order. However, the implementation of transit tolls allow a power-based order to be at the forefront rather than the rules-based maritime order. If that happens, a rules-based international order will be faltering across the board simply beyond the maritime domain. Second, the implementation of transit tolls in the Strait of Hormuz could serve as a negative precedent so that this new measure can be applied to other choke points as well, such as the Strait of Malacca and the Northern Sea route. To top it up, expanding maritime blockade poses serious challenges to economic development and prosperity around the world. Third, if transit tolls were to be implemented indeed, it could pose challenges to international security as well as regional security in the Middle East. Key reasons why Iran attempts to gain complete control of the Strait of Hormuz are the control allows Iran to increase its negotiating power and establish its deterrent power against the United States and Israel. In particular, Iran believes that its control of the Strait of Hormuz allows it to be armed with strategic weapons similar to nuclear weapons. What that means is that Iran could block the Strait of Hormuz whenever it wants for its national interests or its military purposes. In this vein, Iran's attempt to control the Strait of Hormuz makes international security more vulnerable than before. All these 3 points show that Iran's attempt regarding transit tolls is related to its strategy, simply beyond making money. So it is right about time for the international community play an enhanced role in offsetting Iran's attempt rather than simply waiting for the outcome of the United States and Iran negotiation.
Right, indeed. I wonder, Fabian, in the meantime, how important is keeping the Strait of Hormuz open for Europe's economy and energy security, do you think?
Yeah, it is quite important, but maybe not as essential as you might assume. Why? Because European economies are not depending so strongly on the Strait of Hormuz compared to Asian economies. But the ripple effects of a closed, or at least long-term closed Strait of Hormuz would be quite dramatic for Europe as well. Let me break that down into numbers. So in 2025, all the crude oil that passed through the Strait of Hormuz, only maybe a little bit more than 4% was destined for Europe. For LNG, it was 10%, so the LNG dependency is a little higher. But if the Strait of Hormuz is closed, then it would not mean that there's a massive blackout and that Europe would run out of energy immediately. But it would mean that an increasing number of countries would compete for alternative oil supply, and that pushes up prices. And in Europe, especially in my home country, Germany, you already have a lot of high energy costs, mainly because the traditional energy source of Russia is not available anymore after the war in Ukraine. Higher energy costs would mean higher price of food, higher price of construction services, and that comes on top of several years of high inflation. So, of course, this would have massive implications for Europe, and that's why there's a strong incentive that the Strait of Hormuz would remain open.
Right. Professor Ban, based on your observations thus far, do you believe the U.S. and Iran can prevent their conflict from expanding into a wider war involving other states or proxy groups?
To be honest with you, when it comes to war escalation and war expansion to a wider regional war, there is a clear differentiation of strategy between the United States and Iran. From the beginning, the United States wanted to terminate the war as soon as possible within 2 to 4 weeks at most, and likewise, it attempted not to expand it into a wider regional war. By contrast, Iran strategically attempted to expand it into a wider regional war in a situation where it helps offset asymmetry of kinetic power between itself and the United States. To that end, Iran has targeted the Gulf states when it was attacked. Moreover, Iran takes advantage of mobilizing its proxies, such as the Houthi rebels, in an attempt to expanding it into a wider regional war. Recently, the Houthis blocked the Bab al-Mandeb Strait and has been attacking the Saudi facilities as the MOU between the United States and Iran was being broken. This differentiation of strategy inherently makes it hard to prevent the Iran war from expanding into a wider regional war. But at the same time, it is true that both the United States and Iran want to stay away from resuming a full-scale war. From the standpoint of the United States, a total war is not a good option due to various factors such as the midterm election, a shortage of weapon stockpiles, and rising energy prices. From Iran's viewpoint, the United States sea blockade poses a serious challenge to mobilizing its war money and overcoming its economic struggle. Without mobilizing money and being supported by the Iranian people, Iran will not be able to continue a total war against the United States. In this vein, although the chance is slim at the moment, how to prevent it from resuming a full-scale war or from being expanded into a wider regional war is still open. So there are roles to play by mediators to make that happen.
Right, and amid these concerns over tensions in the Middle East, Fabian, here on the Korean Peninsula, North Korea launched a short-range ballistic missile back on Thursday. Do tell us more about this particular launch.
Yeah, so at least one short-range ballistic missile was launched, and it was started around Wonsan, so meaning around the east coast of North Korea. It was flying around 200 kilometers towards the East Sea, so towards the direction of Japan. Now, you could say business as usual. Why? Because there were times where North Korea has been launching short-range ballistic missiles every other week, and no damage was reported, no casualties. But, I mean, it's important to remember, first of all, North Korea is not allowed to launch any ballistic missiles by UN Security Council resolutions. And secondly, the timing is very sensitive. We have rising tensions between North Korea and Japan. Maybe we get to talk about that in a minute. And then, even more importantly, there's a unprecedented military cooperation going on between North Korea and Russia. I want to go a little bit into detail. Just over the weekend, the Ukrainian president Volodymyr Zelensky said that he's expecting that North Korea would send an additional 30,000 or maybe even up to 50,000 soldiers to help Russia in its war efforts. And he also explicitly said that North Korea is learning modern warfare from this war. And of course, those things could be concerning for Seoul as a direct neighbor of North Korea. Now, we have a president here who wants to de-escalate with North Korea, but I mean, there's this dilemma that North Korea might feel emboldened to also military escalate and at least demonstrate power. So in this regard, I would say it's quite concerning if we see even a short-range ballistic missile test here, because the broader implications are we want to demonstrate power, we might even escalate further.
Right. Professor Ban, what message do you believe is North Korea seeking to send with regard to its latest launch?
I would say that the latest launch of an SRBM by North Korea was intended to send multiple signals to the international community as well as South Korea and the United States. First, both tactically and inertially, Pyongyang wanted to send a warning signal to an incoming U.S combined exercise called UFS, Ultra Freedom Shield. North Korea has cited this combined exercise as part of an excuse to bolster its military power. The latest launch shows this provocative inertia continues to go on. Second, strategically, Pyongyang attempted to send a strong signal that it is a nuclear-armed state to the international community in a situation where countries around the world continue their policy of denuclearizing North Korea. To take an example, recently in July 2023, 26 foreign ministers from South Korea, the United States, and Japan reaffirmed the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula through a diplomatic meeting held on the sidelines of the ASEAN Regional Forum. Third, Pyongyang is eager to show the world that it is fully supported by its allies such as Russia and China in its journey to be recognized as an official nuclear weapon state in the world. This intention is clarified in the sense that this latest launch was made right after a series of diplomatic engagements with China and Russia. Notably, Russia acts as a player to indirectly help North Korea rise to the status of a nuclear weapon state. China remains silent over its attempt to be recognized as an official nuclear weapon state in the sense that Beijing is reluctant to reaffirm its policy on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
As mentioned, Fabian, North Korea's latest ballistic missile test, it comes ahead of an annual South Korea-U.S. military exercise that is slated to begin next Monday. Do tell us more about this particular drill and its importance.
Yeah, the Ultra Freedom Shield is a drill that is held by the joint military forces of South Korea and the U.S. Here in the country. Usually it's held in August, this time between the 17th and 27th of August. And you might wonder, especially as someone who's not so familiar with military things, why do you need an annual drill? This is quite important because for the military personnel, for the soldiers, you have a high rotation. They serve a couple of years, then there might be new soldiers coming in, and you need military readiness. You need to practice command procedures, etc. So those are quite important, and those military drills are also designed to practice what would happen in a serious war situation. So for Washington and Seoul, this is important. They emphasize that this is of defensive nature, so we only practice how we can defend ourselves. Pyongyang, North Korea, their leadership says that no, this is warmongering. They are preparing how to attack us. So they have a different view and view this as a big provocation. Regardless, I think the big topic this year is that South Korea is pushing for to retake OPCON. That means operational control under wartime. So basically, right now, if a war would break out, the U.S. side would have the final say. And of course, this is not a desirable situation. Long-term, South Korea should have full operational control. And I think both sides agree that this is the goal that both sides will work towards too, but we don't have a target here. We don't know when this will happen, this transfer of control, and President Lee Jae-myung is pushing to accelerate this process. And one way to demonstrate that the South Korean military has the capability to retake operational control is this military drill. I think that's an opportunity for the South Korean military to shine.
Right. Professor Ban, with regard to North Korea's missile activities, do you suppose the regime is taking advantage of the world's focus on Iran to increase military pressure?
It is an interesting and insightful question, indeed. Well, on the one hand, Iran will serve as a favorable arena for Pyongyang to increase its military pressure with little being hindered by the outside world. In particular, the United States has prevented North Korea from making serious provocations on the Korean Peninsula. But as of right now, the United States is entrapped in the Middle East, and by doing so, its policy on the Korean Peninsula is much less prioritized. In this sense, Pyongyang seems to believe that it's right about time to take advantage of this power vacuum to increase military pressure. On the other hand, increasing military pressure is intended to show its military power to the United States as well as the international community and make America's policy on North Korea more prioritized. This calculus is based on the belief that making policy on North Korea a priority helps North Korea achieve its strategic objective, economic development under an officially recognized nuclear power. Regarding this goal, I define North Korea's recent behavior as a hyper strategy where it behaves like a quasi-great power in specific domains, including diplomacy, while taking advantage of its nuclear armed status. All in all, North Korea's military presence is strategically being bolstered by the Iran war, but at the same time, its military poise is intentionally highlighted to make itself more focused and achieve its strategic goal. In short, this could be explained by the mechanism of the two phases.
Right, and staying with North Korea's behavior, if you will, Fabian, also last week, North Korea's Kim Yo-jong, she warned of new military options over Japan's strike capabilities. For our viewers who may not have been following this particular development, could you walk us through it, please?
Yeah, the immediate trigger was that Japan was test firing a missile, like a Tomahawk missile from a Japanese destroyer. The Tomahawk missile is actually made by the U.S. And that is important because for North Korea, they say that Japan is moving from a defensive military posture to basically wanting to make preemptive strikes, so become more of an aggressor. Of course, Japan is rejecting that claim. They say that we only want to defend ourselves. But the threat that Kim Yo-jong, the sister of Kim Jong-un, made, that North Korea would, take additional military options, would also increase or expand the military arsenal in terms of missiles, that gives you a bigger picture that here in East Asia we have an arms race that is actually already starting. Japan feels threatened by North Korea, but also by a highly militarizing China. I mean, we also have to see that Beijing is increasing its military budget by 7% already for several decades, and also is increasing its nuclear arsenal. Then North Korea feels threatened in its nature. In South Korea also there are voices that say we have to shoulder our own defense much stronger and cannot rely on the U.S. so much anymore. So really, I think this is a vicious cycle, and all of those countries will probably spend much more on military, on nuclear arsenals to some degree. So it is worrying also for the global community.
Right, indeed. Professor Ban, with regard to broader security concerns, I wonder what will you be watching most closely this month?
Well, I will be watching security situations from the three broad directions. First, North Korea tailored CNI. Second, maritime combined exercises between North Korea and China or between North Korea and Russia. And third, China's growing show military force in the Indo-Pacific. First of all, how to respond on incoming ROK-US combined exercise draws attention in a situation where Pyongyang laid out North Korea tailored CNI, conventional and nuclear integration. The 2026 UFS is expected to include nuclear security as well as conventional security when North Korea's growing nuclear threats are taken into consideration. In the meantime, Pyongyang could bolster its nuclear threats during the 2026 UFS in an attempt to offset the combined exercise with additional focus on nuclear security and to highlight the new nuclear concept, which is North Korea tailored CNI. Second, possible combined responses or exercises between North Korea and China or between North Korea and Russia draw attention, particularly during the UFS. In particular, North Korea fielded its first destroyer called Cheon in the West Sea, which means North Korea now is ready for combined exercise with its allies such as China. This changing architecture of maritime weapon systems provides Pyongyang with a possibility for responding to the UFS with new attempts like combined exercises. Third, how Beijing takes advantage of the power vacuum by the United States or its lack of willingness in the Indo-Pacific needs security focus. As the United States is entrapped in the Middle East, as I mentioned earlier, and proposes the concept of a decent peace to China, ironically, Beijing has been bolstering maritime coercion against Indo-Pacific countries like Asian allies of the United States under the enhanced gray zone strategy. Likewise, China is bolstering its nuclear power as shown by a recent launch of an SLBM in the Western Pacific. In particular, China's growing zone threats are security concerns to South Korea as well, particularly in the West Sea. All in all, there are quite a number of security issues that need to be watched for this month, and by doing so, those issues should be dealt with carefully and timely.
Right, indeed. And of course, those concerns, as we have news about Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi potentially visiting Seoul next week. All right, Professor Ban, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thanks for having me.
Fabian, here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights. Right, amid the rampant tensions in the Middle East and on the Korean Peninsula, the international community maintains its call for a tangible path to de-escalation. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.